The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
And Company. My name is Susan Engel, and I direct the Adult Division in the Center for Adult Life and Learning. And I'm so glad to see so many of you with us this evening. Before I begin my introduction, I just want to wish you all a very happy Hanukkah. Tonight, as you know, is the first night of Hanukkah. Please don't forget to join us for the third part in this series in February when Wendy will be interviewing Frank Rich. And be on the lookout for our spring brochure. We have some exciting events planned that I'm sure you won't want to miss, including our Funny People series, which features such personalities as George Carlin, Stiller Mira, Rosie O'Donnell, and Alan King. And coming this week, our film series will be showing the film 1900, and afterwards, Professor Annette Insdorf of Columbia University will be speaking to the great director, Bernardo Bertolucci, about his extraordinary career. And now for tonight, I'm delighted once again to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce our guest. As you know, Wendy Wasserstein is the Pulitzer Prize and Tony Award-winning playwright of such hits as Isn't It Romantic?, The Heidi Chronicles, The Sisters Rosensweig, and yes, she is currently working on a new play which should premiere next year entitled An American Daughter. One of our most beloved playwrights and a true friend of the 92nd Street Y, who keeps on enriching our programs with her talent and ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Wendy Wasserstein.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Happy Hanukkah. Jane Alexander is tireless. Since becoming chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, Miss Alexander has visited more than 130 communities in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. In over 150 public speeches, she has outlined her vision for the agency with thousands of people. She has met personally with members of Congress, governors, mayors, state legislators, artists, corporate, education, and community leaders throughout the nation. She has also played Eleanor Roosevelt, a Supreme Court judge, and a banker in my play, The Sisters Rosensweig. And in fact, it was after that play, when Jane had her nomination, that Robert Klein said those inimitable words, "I kiss a woman and she goes into government." Jane is a truly extraordinary person. She's an extraordinary artist, and she's also an extraordinary public servant. And she's somebody everyone who is in the arts in this country or goes to the arts in this country is very lucky to have there. It's my honor to present Jane Alexander. So Jane, I think let's talk about the NEA and what's the story, what's really happening there, Jane.
Oh gosh, well we have a 40% cut to the agency, but the good news is the agency was not eliminated. Mm-hmm. It was number one on the hit list as closely as 2-3 days ago when the bill went through House and Senate again, and it survived, and it's not going to be eliminated, not yet. And the House has given us a stay of execution. 1997 fiscal year, they say they're going to fund us again at $99.5 million, that's the 40% cut, and then eliminate us altogether in 1998. So we have a lot of work to do in this coming year, but I think we can turn it around.
In terms of the 1998 elimination, what can be done to stop that? How is that?
Well, I'm prescribed from lobbying. However, it is an election year, and that can make a big difference. It all hangs on those threads of who feels strongly about the arts. One of the reasons I think the agency survived this year was that so many people in the country let their congressmen and women know that the arts were really important to them in their communities.
Do you think with the 40% cut that therefore the NEA has become unthreatening to those who are threatened by the NEA?
No, I don't think so. Not yet. I just think its sheer existence is still a thorn in their sides.
When I was down lobbying for the NEA, one came across often people in Congress who were saying, well, the arts are elitist. When did this happen? I mean, certainly the artists that I know are not, basically elitists living on millions of dollars somewhere. How did this happen? Was this a positioning thing?
There's a lot of people in Congress now who don't have a relationship to the nonprofit arts world. They don't have, they may have a relationship to popular culture, but they don't really have any relationship to the nonprofit arts. And when they do look at a magazine, when they do turn on the television, often they will see people in tuxedos and ball gowns at nonprofit arts events. And so it's very possible they believe that that's how most people dress and go and see these events all the time.
Right.
It's an enigma to me why they call it elitist. As you pointed out, I've been to, now it's by over 150 cities and towns across the country and to all of the states, and there's nothing at all elitist about the nonprofit arts, and nothing at all elitist about what the NEA does. Yes, we do support some opera. Yes, of course, we support ballet. But you want to know something? There's opera and there's ballet companies and dance companies in every single pocket of America today. It's astonishing. And that's in great part due to the NEA, the kind of seeding that we have done, kind of a Johnny Appleseed of the arts, if you will, over the past 30 years, has helped all these little burgeoning organizations grow in these 30 years.
Is the view of those who are against the NEA, are they more thinking about New York artists, Los Angeles artists than, say, the Children's Museum in Kansas City, or is that?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. But they really have sort of stopped time for the NEA at about 6 years ago when the Mapplethorpe and Serrano contretemps happened. And that's what I still hear today. Well, you shouldn't be funding that kind of art. And that's what really concerns them. And I think that's what a lot of the cuts and the attacks are about.
Has the work of the religious right, will it now affect who gets an NEA grant in terms of individual artists?
The individual artists' fellowships have been eliminated with the exception of literature. And that's in no small part, audience, to Wendy Wasserstein making trips to the Hill and a number of other writers on a weekly basis, not Wendy on a weekly basis, but writers on a weekly basis, making trips to pertinent congressmen and women and really making the case for creative writing. So they did not eliminate literature, nor playwrights, but they eliminated all the visual artists' individual grants, choreographers, folk and traditional artists, with the exception of our Heritage Fellows awards, which are to the masters in their field, and jazz masters are the only ones left. Now, I think that by eliminating individuals, they hope to ferret out the root of all evil here somehow. And I tried to explain to them that all art begins in the mind of one creative individual and then involves collaborators and facilitators and all that. But that didn't cut any ice. There's one problematical development that happened is in that two Helms amendments, Jesse Helms got two Helms amendments through this time, which unfortunately look like they're going to stick in our legislation for 1996. And one of them prohibits awarding anything that denigrates anybody's religion. Well, this is very, very sticky proposition. first of all, denigrate is not a legal term. Second of all, does that mean that half the art that hangs in museums, that is Christian art, that might be offensive, or offensive is another word in there, to another religion? Do we take that off the walls? So that's a very problematic amendment. The other one is a prohibition against offensively depicting excretory or sexual activities.
Oh.
And that's a tough one, too. I mean, if somebody blows their nose very loudly or in a way that might cause people offense, is that something we're supposed to take seriously? We really don't know, and we're looking carefully at those right now.
But it's good that Jesse Helms spends his time thinking about it.
Yeah.
So, in terms of people write about privatization of the arts and alternatives to the NEA, what do you think of that? I mean, we'll use the chairperson of the NEA, but are any of these other thoughts, are they viable, do you think?
We're looking very carefully at ways to get alternative resources. We've been asked by Congress to do that. And with a 40% budget cut, as I said, at $99.5 million now, and the inability to give grants to so many worthy organizations in the United States, it wouldn't behoove us not to look at these things. So we are looking at alternative resources for funding. However, at the same time, I never want to vitiate the federal role, because I think that if you didn't have the NEA today, you'd have to invent it. You really do need a national voice, some organization on a national, federal level that convenes people, has the overview of all the arts in America like the NEA does today, can work with the states, can give national recognition of excellence, and so on. So it's a tricky thing to do, because at the same time you don't want the federal role eliminated, because I think it's entirely appropriate that the government does fund culture, and yet there is not enough money to serve the field adequately, and there are many companies, as we speak, dance companies that primarily need public funding, and folk and traditional artists, etc., expansion arts, educational outreach programs that are just going under, really.
What, if you had to name a different, country where you feel that the arts has been satisfactorily funded, whether it's England or Germany, or is there, where would you say that?
Well, all the European countries fund the arts very heavily. I think probably France would be my number one. The French care very much about their culture. I mean, they think it's the largest jewel in their crown of what is called France. So they take care of it, they nurture it, and the French individual is taxed accordingly, to the tune of about close to $50 now per person per capita per year. In our country now, we're taxed about 34 cents per person per year. However, let me just explain one thing. Europe doesn't have the public-private partnership that we have here in the United States. What we do is unique in our sponsoring of the arts, because most of it comes from the private sector. Most of the money comes from individuals. And I'm not talking about putting down your money for a ticket. I'm talking about that unearned income gap of 60 to 40%, which is what all nonprofit arts organizations usually suffer. And individuals come in, and their $50 laid down here or there makes a real difference year after year. Individuals, corporations, and of course foundations as well. And what the public sector does, the federal government in the NEA, the state government, New York State Council on the Arts, and the city of New York, is they give that very important catalyst money, or what I like to call venture capital money, that risk money that says, this is a good bet. We're gonna bet on this organization because we think down the line they're going to really grow and blossom. Take anything like Dance Theater of Harlem or something like that started with these kind of grants, and Alvin Ailey Company and on and on. And New York Shakespeare Festival and so on.
Do you think if, let's say there was, I'm just making this up, a national referendum where the country got to vote on do you want to give 34 cents a year to the arts, how do you, I mean, from your travels, how do you think that would go?
Actually, the American public is quite responsive when you do polling, and there was a recent one that hasn't been published, so I can't really tell you who and when did it, but they asked that question, how much would you be willing to give? Would you be willing to give $15 a year? No. I'm talking about majorities now.
Right.
Would you be willing to give 10? Yes. $10 a year more. Well, now it's 34 or 35 cents, so that's quite an increase. That's the majority of people. When you ask the American public about arts education, fully 95% say they want their child to have arts education in their schools. So I think that there's some kind of a schism there between what's going on in Congress and what's going on with most of the people in the United States.
Right. Bob Brustein had an op-ed piece in the Times. Did you see that about linking arts with education, and that there was also a case to be made for art for art's sake, and that so much of arts funding now and the case for NEA was all sort of wrapped up in education?
I saw it, yeah, and I've talked to Bob about that. You see, I don't think you vitiate excellence at all by getting involved in all kinds of areas, arts for the elderly, arts for kids, community festivals, and so on. You're still going to reach a level of excellence. The more people you get in there, it seems to me, the more they're going to be appreciative of art forms, and the more they're going to seek out that which is the highest standard. So I think there's plenty of, quote, art for art's sake going on, and I think it'll continue to go on.
And Jane, what about your life as an actor? Did this prepare you for this role in Washington?
Playing a banker in Sisters Rosensweig
Yes.
did, yes. Actually, I think the theater is a wonderful education for so many things in life. It's collaborative. It's dealing with words and communication, and it involves reflective thought processes, and it also involves a lot of analytical thinking. So I think I was very well served by my career in the theater.
And who in Washington have you met who would make a good actor?
There's a lot of frustrated actors, let me tell you. And they actually jump at the chance to perform. On the stage. And I remember I visited one wonderful senator not long ago, and he couldn't wait to show me the video of his barbershop quartet with 3 other senators. And the most amazing thing that happened, I think, that I heard of last year was Isaac Stern paid some calls on the Hill, too, on behalf of the endowment, and one of the calls he paid was to Senator Byrd of West Virginia, who's a very, very important senator and has been for a number of years. And Isaac sat there while Senator Byrd played a tape of him fiddling.
Did he?
And then asked Isaac to critique it.
I'm sure.
And Isaac did. And he said, yeah, well, you had a style, he said.
Yeah, I went to visit a Congressman Hoke from Ohio, who's written a musical about Lincoln and played me his overture. And he wanted to know about agents, and I thought, I'm going to talk about the William Morris Agency now. We hear so much about, the freshmen and Congress people and what they're like. Let's maybe something positive. Who do you admire in Washington now?
Other than my boss?
Yes.
Unfortunately, some of the people that I admire are leaving. I very much admire Mark Hatfield, but he's leaving. Alan Simpson is a very good friend to the endowment from Wyoming. He's leaving. Nancy Kassebaum has been chairing the Labor and Human Resources Committee under which the endowment comes. She's leaving. She's from Kansas. Bill Bradley's left, will be leaving very shortly. I admire Barbara Boxer. She's tenacious. She gets up there. Ted Kennedy. These are people who again and again will stand up for the Arts Endowment. Jim Jeffords of Vermont. And these are bipartisan. I mean, Jim Jeffords is a Republican, Ted Kennedy, of course, Democrat, and Barbara Boxer, a Democrat. I think if I regret anything, it's that the agency has become so partisan since Helms brought up the Mapplethorpe and Serrano issue 6 years ago. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. The arts are really for everybody, and it really should go back to the way it was when it was created. And it was under Nixon that the endowment's budget escalated. It went from around 4 or 5 million to almost 100 million during Nixon's time. So we shouldn't forget that and try to get back to that.
Is there a way you can get to that in some way? Or has it been...
Not in the current climate, I think, with this desire to reduce the deficit and balance the budget. I think it's going to be very tricky. However, the president and also certain people in Congress recognize that a 40% cut to the endowment is really disproportionate to what other agencies are getting. So I would like to see some sanity there and some restoration of those cut funds.
What I've never understood is that when the speaker gets up and talks against, violence in films and how horrible this all is, that there's no link to be made, well, if you're cutting the arts and you're cutting ballet companies, which are pretty much nonviolent as far as I can make out, why isn't it seen that one way of, perpetuating other kinds of culture is by giving money to the endowment as opposed to, because then you're left with...
Exactly, and one of the first people that I sat down with when I took office was Attorney General Reno, and I said, I think that the arts can really help a lot of kids that are right on borderline and at risk. And we agreed that she, when she was in Dade County, Florida, had seen that an artist who was mentoring a kid and giving that child skills and a one-to-one relationship did more good than incarceration or any kind of correctional facility. And so I'm very pleased to report that here we are 2 years later, and we have almost $1 million from the Department of Justice for programs that partnership with the endowment for at-risk youth in the country. And they're really wonderful programs. So I try to talk to congressmen and women about this, but a lot of them just don't get it. I think they have to see it firsthand, as Attorney General Reno and myself have seen it, what it can do for young people. I've seen so many kids turned around. I said a lot in my speeches the first year that the child who picks up, or the young man who picks up a paintbrush or a clarinet is not going to pick up a needle or a gun. And I still maintain that's true if you have consistency in teaching the arts to that child.
Well, Jane, it's that you were having a conversation with Janet Reno and that it was you. What about women in government and women in Washington? Is there, do you begin to, when you're dealing with people, are you dealing with more and more women? Are you, treated in a certain way because you are a woman or
Yeah. I think it's remarkable, and maybe it's not known very much how many women are in high government positions. I mean, from Attorney General Reno to Donna Shalala at Health and Human Services, and Laura Tyson, and Alice Rivlin, and on and on. And I meet Hazel O'Leary. I meet a lot of them, and they're really terrific and very sharp. And a lot of their second-in-commands, too, are women. So there's a lot of women running Washington. It's good.
Well, because there are always so many opinions about the First Lady, and should she wear headbands, shouldn't she? Should she make cookies, should she not? And interestingly, that hasn't surrounded you in a way. You know, well, there's no headband.
No, I think that the First Lady is a target in ways that none of the rest of us are. And I think it's very hard for her to walk that line because of who she is in relationship to the president. And of course, she's a very bright, very competent woman, and you know, she could be president. She's so smart.
Well, Jane, thinking about, talking about freshmen and the incoming people, who are friendly towards the art? Where's the hope there? Is there any?
Oh, gosh. It's very hard to, yes, there are plenty of people, and there's a lot of people here in New York. Amo Houghton from upstate New York, and certainly a lot of the congressmen and women right here, Carol Maloney and Jerry Nadler, and almost all of the ones right in New York City, except we got to work on Susan Molinari. She's Staten Island. She's not coming to the fore for the arts, and you know, it's very important for a city like New York, who some of you may know about this Port Authority study that was done on New York and New Jersey in the metropolitan area, and the impact of the arts on the city. And it's a $9 billion a year kind of business. And it seems to me that since so much of our tourists come to New York for those reasons, that all of the legislators should really get behind that. It's a very important part of this great city. So the New Yorkers are very friendly, and Louise Slaughter, another upstate Rochester congresswoman, is highly supportive, used to be head of the Arts Caucus in the House. And then you get some people from some rural areas who are amazingly supportive, like Pat Williams of Montana. The only congressperson from Montana is Pat Williams, and he's immensely supportive of the arts.
Well, that's sort of hopeful.
Oh, yeah. They will work for it.
But when we read now about changes in opinions polls and, you know, Clinton's ratings going up, will that somehow affect also feelings about the arts, too? I mean, do you feel, you know, if the president is reelected, somehow this will bode well for the NEA, or?
I think it's more now in control of the House and the Senate than it is the president. The president is very supportive of the arts, and everybody in the administration is. And we work together, but it's really in the hands of Congress.
And is there any way to make inroads on the speaker at all? I don't want to be there.
The speaker has yet to meet with me. I've had a standing request in for over a year. And he has, I mean, I met him once informally, but he didn't want any real talk. And I think you've met him, Wendy.
I did meet him once. And that was enough, I think. That was a disappointing journey. Well, except that they did keep funding for individual artists, so.
Yes,
yeah,
I think that you made a difference.
Yeah, well, this was a time that Melanie Griffith and I and Joanne Woodward and Walter Mosley went down there, and the speaker met with us, but I think that had a lot to do with Melanie Griffith being there, frankly. So I'm pretty sure about that. And Jane, do you think do you think you would come back to acting? Do you
Oh,
miss
I'd
us?
love to. I really
Yeah.
would love to, yes. And I think I will in time, but I'm very committed to the agency right now because I feel that if the agency does go under, it will be such an enormous loss to this country. There's no major industrial nation in the world that doesn't have government funding of the arts. So I think if we get through these next couple of years, we can maintain the agency and then begin to build it up again. Because it's what most people don't seem to realize about the endowment is that it's a grant-giving agency, but for every dollar that we award, we ask for a 1-to-1 match or a 3-to-1 match, and what we get is usually a 12-to-1 match. So it's a terrific little economic engine. So I think that I'll stick it out and try to keep this agency afloat for the next 2 years.
Well, I think that's great. Well, I think we can take some questions from the audience as well. So I think, yeah, that's great. Well, the gentleman in the glass.
Excuse me?
You said that you get a return of 3-to-1, a 4-to-1, a 12-to-1 on money that you invest. Where does that come from?
Oh, it's not money we invest. Well, we invest in nonprofit arts, but for every dollar we award, we ask for an organization to match it 1-to-1. And in some cases, we ask for a match of $3 to every one that we award. Now, what we get usually on average is 12-to-1 because an arts organization is able to leverage that much money from the dollar that we give them.
Someone else? Yeah.
I see a lot of financial statements of nonprofits, and my observation has been that the government funding is substantially more than the private funding from foundations, corporations, and private philanthropy. Is that incorrect? And that doesn't seem to jive with what you said about the 1-to-1 or 3-to-1 match.
If you're talking about a place like Lincoln Center, what we give them is really less than 1% of their budget. If you're talking about a small arts organization in the South Bronx that doesn't have as much access to private sector giving, corporate support, we can give them up to 50% of their budget. Not more. We're not allowed to do more than that. But that would be the 1-to-1 match, you see. So in that, you're right. It depends which annual report or financial report you read. If it's a small arts organization, a new one, you're going to see a lot more public funding.
Yeah.
I was wondering, if the endowment goes under, will the money from the federal government be filtered to the individual states to fund arts organizations?
Well, that's a good question. Right now, we do block grant over 40% of our budget to the states. Now, this block granting, we used to have a little more control over it last year. Now it is, we just give it to them. There is a 7.5% of that, however, has to be used for underserved. That means people in rural areas, people in inner city areas, people who just anywhere who may not have access to the arts. Sometimes it's ethnically diverse groups, or but.
And the states are mandated to give that 7.5%?
They have to apply to us with their plan for how they're going to deal with that money for the underserved. But the total of what we do give almost directly to the states is over 40% as of fiscal year 96, which began in October. So that's a substantial amount of our money already. But we also work very closely with the states. And we're going to be working even more closely with them in this coming year, doing a state-by-state profile of their nonprofit arts and see how we can best work together and plug up some of the holes that a lot of these organizations are feeling.
The lady near the wall there.
In light of the 40% reduction in the budget, do you anticipate in the next 2 years the number of recipients of grants diminishing, or will everyone receive a proportionate cut across the board?
That's a really good question. When we were pretty sure we were going to get this cut in August, we had the option of either doing that, which would mean that organizations that were getting $5,000 would now actually be getting, it's less than half, in fact, if you factor in the fact that our administration costs actually rise as our budget goes down. And now I had to just say goodbye to half of my staff at the endowment. When I came in 2 years ago, I had a staff of 279. Now I have a staff of 148 as of yesterday, day before. We have to take care of those people who are going out with their pensions and things, so our administrative costs have risen. So what I decided to do was restructure the whole agency. And rather than give proportionate cuts to everybody, we now are coming in under 4 different themes: heritage and preservation, education and access, creation and presentation, and planning and stabilization. And because I've had such a reduction in staff, we're cutting the number of applications that we receive from 16,500 last year to 2,000 this year. We're looking to do very focused of recognition of the very best in the country in all the arts fields, and that doesn't mean just the big guys. It means sometimes you'll find an absolutely extraordinary little jewel in one little community in a country, and we will be awarding those kinds of things in those 4 theme areas. A lot fewer people are going to be getting grants than ever got them before.
Yes, sir.
When you answered Wendy Wasserstein's question about the comparison between European support for the arts and the U.S. government support, you mentioned that in the U.S. a very large part of the funding for most organizations comes from individuals, corporations, and foundations. If you had your own preference, would you rather see $50 per person per year coming from taxpayers the way it is in France, or would you prefer to keep it the way it is?
That's a good question. I think that not only are we unique, I think the public-private partnership is what makes our art so exciting in America. But I think that you cannot keep reducing the public part of it, which is what is happening, and saying that the private sector is going to pick it all up. The private sector has told us that there's no way they can pick up the slack. The foundations, the corporations, and the corporations in these coming years are going to have a lot of other priorities, mainly in the areas of social issues, health, human resource issues. And they're going to have to look to those probably before they look to the arts. It's going to be very problematic. So, to answer your question, I think we've got to keep this partnership, public-private, but just make sure that the public role is sufficient to do the job. See, what we do at the NEA is we panel. We bring together, last year we brought together over 1,100 individuals who are arts experts in their field, and Wendy sat on the playwrights panels. And they come together and they adjudicate these 16,500 applications. This was last year, and nobody else does that in the country. Nobody brings together people from all over the country in all different arts fields, all different ethnicities, races, and different feelings about art, different aesthetics. The panels are very exciting and very stimulating. And we do that job for a lot of the corporate world and the foundation world. And that's how, when we put our money on something, how they can say, oh, then we know it must be a good thing if the NEA puts their money on it.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, on our tax return, we're asked if we want to contribute to a presidential. Why aren't we asked if we want to contribute to the NEA? Even that dollar seems to be a 300% increase.
That's right. Well, it's a pretty good idea. It's been tried in some states. Unfortunately, it tends to work very well the first year, less well the second, and after a while, you're going to have everything from, Flying Pigs of America Corporation or Foundation wanting to get in there too.
Are we different because we are New Yorkers and we need it? I mean, it's a necessity here in New York City, whether it's there or Lincoln Center, that we look at things differently.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I just know that I've been trying to look at a lot of different areas of alternative resources, and the states that have tried these tax checkoffs after a while find there are diminishing returns that are so significant, and they've lost their appropriation from the legislation, and they'd rather have it appropriated from the legislation year in and year out.
Yes.
I'd like to know more about your influence on the panelists and the kinds of programs that are selected and as to why they finally get funded.
Until this year, it was a three-tiered process. The first was the panelists come together. As I said, last year there were 1,100 of them in 100 different categories. Actually, we cut some of the categories last year, so there weren't quite as many as that. But these panels are usually around 12, 15 people, and they look at all of the applications in that given field or category, and they talk about them. Wendy, maybe you can answer better.
Yeah.
You've been on a playwrights panel.
Actually, I've been both a I'm a threefold person. I actually won an NEA grant in 1984. I had an NEA grant for like $11,000, and I wrote the Heidi Chronicles on it. And it made a huge difference to me. It meant I could finish the second act of that play. So there's a baby shower in that play because the NEA bought my baby shower. And I've sat on panels, and last year I chaired the playwriting panel, and it is a wonderful thing. On this panel were like 8 other theater professionals. There were 2 playwrights, me and Ken Ludwig, a Washington playwright who wrote Moon Over Buffalo. There was a woman, Sherry Goldhirsch, who runs the Young Playwrights Festival. There was a man who runs an African-American theater in North Carolina. There was I think Luis Valdez was on this panel. It was all people. There were theater artists from across the country, and actually, it was just one of those occasions where there was a real dialogue about the theatrical life of this country. And there was no agenda in terms of picking these writers, except that this was individual grants to playwrights, except out of mutual respect for the other people on this panel. But certainly, in terms of, and I know Jane, but there wasn't I thought it really worked. I was amazed how well it worked. And we sat there. We had read the plays originally, I guess, went through a group of readers, and then we read the finalists, but also there was a stack of all the applications, so you could go back and read any play. But it seemed, it's one of those rare things where you go down to Washington, you're on this panel for 2 days, and you think, oh my God, this works. This is really one of those rare occasions. And then now the panels are advisory. Then their recommendations are passed on to the National Council on the Arts, which is a 26-person body appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. And again, this is a very diverse group of people from all over the country, different art fields. Some of them are arts patrons and so on. They then recommend or reject the recommendations from the panel.
most of the time, they pass them through to the chairman. And then I have the final say on those that they approve. I cannot bring back anything that they reject. So it's a 3-tiered process. Now we're moving into a 4-tiered process. We're going to start with the discipline review, which is sort of what Wendy's been talking about. Then we're going to pass into a combined arts theme review. What I'm interested in is getting people looking at the very best that America has to offer in all the different arts fields. Because everything that will be passed to the combined arts review will be the very top of the line from the discipline review. It's the kind of thing that we would be funding if we had twice as much money normally. So I'm interested in bringing together these people in all different areas and, from the arts, and then having them adjudicate what they feel is the very top. And then it will pass on to the council and then to me.
The lady with the glasses.
No, there's no money available for individual visual artists. There's plenty of money available for exhibitions, special exhibitions.
But not an individual artist, but has to be a group.
It would be a museum or a gallery.
How does the young artist get?
Well, yeah, it's problematical.
Good question. Someone else? Yes.
If we are to continue to press for increased grants from the NEA, how can we assure freedom of expression without the imposition of censorship, which tends to show its ugly head from time to time by those who make the applications to the NEA?
Well, at the agency, we're always involved in... Yes.
The question was about basically censorship, I think. Was that?
Yeah. She said, how can we continue to give the grants at the NEA and not be concerned with censorship or freedom of expression? Well, we're already forbidden or prohibited from funding anything that is obscene or found to be obscene in a court of law. And a court of law has defined that about 19 different ways in the past decade or so. And so it's not incumbent upon us to make that decision. But our criteria is excellence and artistic merit. Now, we do have these 2 Helms amendments now to deal with, but we're still trying to find out from White House legal counsel, the Justice Department, and even some congressional legal counsel, how we are supposed to deal with these problematical Helms amendments.
Has it been a problem in Europe?
Yes, actually, there are a number of countries now in Europe, Britain being one, Italy, that are also beginning to have real restrictions on government funding. Certain parts of them are, but we try to protect the applicant to the best of our ability because so many of our applicants are rejected. We don't want it to impact negatively on their work. So you might be able to. Part of the panels are in open session, and you probably could get the transcripts of those if you wrote the agency.
Gentleman in the white sweater.
Yeah, you seem to have a lot of control over what you do at the federal level. The 40% that you block grant for the states, what kind of control does the NEA have over what the block grants?
Well, the state still has to let us know what they're doing with the money, but it's essentially theirs to do with what they will, with the exception of the underserved money that I spoke of, and the arts and education money. But as I said, we work so closely with the states, and we pretty much know what they're doing already. We have an area at the agency called Partnership, which deals with the grants to the states. And so even though they can do what they want, we're pretty much in concert, and we don't have a problem people just taking their money and running and not talking to us about it.
I thought perhaps since you were being cut back, that you might want to bring more at the federal level where you do have that much control. That it might be advantageous to keep more at the federal level.
Well, yes, the amount of money going to this, he was asking about how much money was, whether we didn't want at the NEA to keep more money at the federal level rather than block granting it to the states. I think that we don't want to see any more money block granted to the states, and it's been creeping up year after year. Right now, we're in a happy partnership with them, but if it started to get over 50, 60%, the federal role is totally diminished.
There was, yes, that lady.
An applicant submitted a script more than once, even though it's been rejected, and they resubmitted and keep resubmitting the same script?
Yes, I believe they can. Wendy, did you have
Yeah,
that
the
one?
question was, can an applicant submit the same script more than once? And the answer is yes, they can. Actually, having served on committees, I've recognized scripts that get submitted. And in fact, I think I applied for an NEA grant more than once, and a lot of my colleagues have as well. Because you have to understand that for a playwright, there aren't that many venues, and you're not talking, there is a grant where you can get a grant for 2 years from the NEA, but most of the grants are for a year, and mostly they're going between $12,000, $60,000. So it's not a great deal of money, but for a playwright, it is, because you can take that time, whatever time it is, and work. I mean, the other venues open to you are the Guggenheim. Then there used to be New York State grants. I don't even know if they're still around or not. I guess so. But there just isn't that many places to go. It's really vitally important. If I told you, the list of people who have written plays on NEA grants, including Tony Kushner, Adrian Kennedy, I mean, it just, goes, most people that playwrights that you know of at one point had gotten one of these grants, and it made a big difference to them.
And give them an idea of the proportion, the number of applicants and those that are awarded.
I can't even, how many this last year? I can't even remember.
I don't remember for playwrights, but for literature, it's 3% of the applications are awarded.
Something like that.
3%. And the record has been extraordinary in creative fiction. The NEA, some of you may have read Annie Proulx's The Shipping News, or Jane Smiley's 1,000 Acres, recent Pulitzer Prize winners. Those were both NEA fellowships. And on. It's something like 24 out of 27 of the last major prize winners in literature for fiction have been NEA fellows.
It's amazing because it's very incipient. It's because I remember David Henry Hwang got one around 3 years before M. Butterfly, and mine was like 2.5 years before the Heidi Chronicles was produced in New York. So it's the choices of people is sort of right. It's right there, and the range of them is interesting as well. Yes.
That's a different entity. The recipient of the block grant is New York State Council on the Arts, NYSCA, that the chairman is Kitty Carlisle Hart.
This lady with the red hair. I'm sorry, could you speak up louder? I can't hear you. The question is, how could the existence of two artists, Mapplethorpe and the reaction to those two artists of Mapplethorpe and Serrano threaten the existence of the agency?
It's been going on for 6 years, and I really wasn't at the agency. I've been there only 2 years, but it started back in 1990 when Jesse Helms was running for office in North Carolina. and stumbled upon these grants that were given to, actually, the NEA gave them to museums for exhibitions. They were not direct grants to the artists. They were to the museums, and they went to very prestigious museums, and didn't cause any kind of problem until the senator decided to use them, and then also Senator D'Amato got into the act on the floor of the Senate. And it became a scandal, if you will. And unfortunately, I don't think it was handled very well by a lot of different people on both sides of the issue. And it just got out of hand. And I think now it's beginning to quiet down. I mean, it's an absurd fact that two grants specifically, and then there was Karen Finley, some of the performance artists you may have remembered, Tim Miller, Karen Finley, and Holly Hughes and John Fleck, I believe, was the other. The Finley Four, they were called. So then the attacks were on performance artists. But there's just one statistic. If I haven't given it to you, I will give it to you again. The NEA has given 110,000 grants in 30 years, and 40 of them have caused some people some problems. 40. Now that is an incredible ratio for success. And every single agency should have that kind of ratio.
That's true. Okay, I think we have time for like 2 more questions.
I'm very encouraged by the allegiance and cooperation of the Department of Justice, and I think somewhat of the Department of Human Resources. How can we, as individual citizens, encourage this kind of collaboration and funding, since it is at the heart of what you said, that perhaps could help our young people in this nation?
Thank you. Well, we now have about 35 partnerships with other federal agencies. And I think one of our finest hours was when the tragedy happened in Oklahoma last spring. And we have a wonderful program at the endowment called the Mayor's Institute for Design. And what it does is twice a year bring together about 35 mayors by invitation to come to a city and sit down at a table together with our design staff at the endowment and some design experts and architects, and talk about a specific problem for a city design. You know, it could be a new viaduct, or it could be another thing that had to do with federal building in a city. It's extremely successful. Well, Mayor Norick of Oklahoma City was due to come to our Mayor's Institute of Design, and the bombing happened, and he called up and he said, I just can't make it. And our design program director, who's an indomitable woman named Samina Qureshi, said, oh, you must come, more than ever now, you must come. And she said, just come for one day. Well, he did. And he so became enamored of what the NEA design program had to offer the city of Oklahoma after the bombing, because it wasn't just the federal building in Oklahoma City, it was many, many buildings around it, and the whole city, downtown part, had to be rebuilt. So what we did was offer them a design charrette, which we gave them. We convened leaders in Oklahoma who were in design and architecture. We brought in finest architects and designers from around the country. We sat down with them in Oklahoma, and they started to rebuild the city right there. And we got the Department of Transportation, another federal agency, Housing of Urban Development under Henry Cisneros, the NEA, and the Government Services Administration working in partnership to rebuild downtown Oklahoma. And it all happened because of the NEA.
Okay, one more question, please. That gentleman?
I'd like to know what it costs you annually to convene these panels and do the transcripts and have the reading have all the preparatory work as a percentage of the grants that you make individually.
Our administrative costs. That's correct, yeah. But the per diem is really quite small.
It's
not-
quite minimal. I mean, it's not, 2 nights at the Watergate and dinner at,
Right. Our administrative costs up until this year were about 12.5% of the agency's budget, but that also took care of all the salaries for the staff. Bringing the panels in is actually not a great cost per year. It's in the neighborhood of $100,000 a year. Out of a $99.5 million budget, it's pretty reasonable.
Okay, well, I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.